Thanks for staying with Newsnight. We continue our interview. Xoli Mngambi is in conversation with the former president, Thabo Mbeki. Xoli?
Thank you very much, Kathy. And let's pick up, Mr. President, on the ills. I suppose that you were talking about earlier, that the ANC is now a party in government and you have certain people who join not to contribute to the quality of the politics, but rather to get onto the gravy train, sure, if you like. You were colleagues in the first Democratic cabinet. You were deputy president at the time. Winnie Madikizela-Mandela was a deputy minister at that time. Did you ever get time to interact? What was that working relationship like?
Well, Xoli, I think you would recall that what Madiba said at the time was that he needed to attend to the bigger sort of macro challenges facing the country. He was very concerned, for instance, about the possibility of people from the old order who would not have been happy with the transition to democracy and would therefore try to do something mischievous, to disrupt, to destabilize. He was very concerned about that. So, for instance, he would make certain that we had a cabinet committee in government on safety and security. And he'd always make a point to attend all the meetings of that particular committee. There were two others, which were the economic and political, social. But this one, security one, he would always attend because of that fear. But also, you would see that he paid a lot of attention to talking to the Afrikaner people, because he was also arguing that, you see, if you have a group like that, which might want to destabilize because it does not accept change, it would want to draw on the support of the Afrikaner people. Therefore, it was important to win the Afrikaner people to the cause of democracy, which is why he paid the kind of attention he did, meeting the old lady, Mrs. Verwoerd, and so on. To do this thing, it was to make sure that the democratic order, the new democratic order, is not disrupted. So I'm saying he was saying that it needs to attend to global matters of that kind, and therefore said to me, and then you must attend to the detailed matters of government. So that's why we then had to, as deputy president, had to deal more in a sense of daily sense with the ministers and deputy ministers, including Winnie as deputy minister at the time. So it was really just managing government.
I want to talk about the difficult moments, Mr. President. Then there comes a time that Winnie is dismissed from cabinet. What precipitated that?
No, as I recall it, Xoli, the rule was that if ministers, deputy ministers have got to travel out of the country, they need to clear that with the president. At least the president must know. And so notice was sent, I can't remember, she was supposed, I think, to the United States or somewhere, or somewhere. And the president said no. Nevertheless, she went in defiance. So of course, when she comes back, the president says, in which case, it's not possible to govern. And therefore, please leave. And there were some hitches because there were certain procedural matters which were not handled correctly. And in the end, they were corrected. But that was the reason she defied the decision actually had been communicated to her by the president.
Then comes another difficult moment that you had to encounter as someone who was, I think, coming in at the time as leader of the party. It's the Mafikeng conference, where I think she argues for a short adjournment or postponement so that there could be some kind of caucusing that goes on, and you put your foot down and you say, no, it's not going to happen. And then she takes a seat and Jacob Zuma emerges as deputy president when she, in actual fact, would have emerged as deputy president of the party. We don't know. How did you deal with that moment? How was that moment like, and what did it take to reconcile?
Well, it was not difficult because she, some people suggested to her that she should run for position of deputy president, as you say. Now, in her case, because she had not been nominated by anybody in terms of the processes that happened before ANC conferences, she had to be nominated from the floor. And the Constitution said that 25% of the delegates must nominate you in order to stand. So that's why she asked for an adjournment, because she wanted to do some canvassing of the delegates.
Yes.
After which we would then say, okay, let's now vote who wants to nominate her. It was completely out of order. I mean, the people who supported her knew the rules. They knew what the ANC Constitution says and ought to have prepared themselves. Because if they had said, me, I stand up, Mr. Comrade Chairman, and I want to nominate Comrade Winnie, I would have said, is there a seconder? And some would say, yes, seconded. I say, okay, the matter must then go to the vote. But she wanted to canvass these people, which is completely out of order. So of course, I ruled it out. But she then asked to speak. So I said, fine. So she came and she addressed the conference to say she apologizes to the people who supported her. She accepts the ruling by the chair. She thinks she doesn't think there's anything wrong with the ruling, and therefore, for those who wanted to nominate her, she declines the nomination and went and sat down. And that was the end of the matter.
I'm going to, again, go back to another difficult moment. I promise this is the last difficult moment we're going to deal with. Then there is the moment, Mr. President. It is 2001, and the occasion is the 25th anniversary of the 1976 June uprisings. It's that anniversary. And she arrives late at the function, and there is a short interaction between yourself and her, and it seems to get out of hand. We see her hat on the floor. Again, dealing with that moment, the difficulty of that moment, how do you reconcile again after that? And did that speak to perhaps the strong character that she was?
No, there was no need again for any reconciliation. It's because she did something wrong. And she liked arriving at meetings late, deliberately.
Why was that deliberate, Mr. President?
In order to get applause, because everybody is sitting. The only person who's arriving is her. And as happened in the stadium that day, as would happen normally, she comes in alone and draws attention. People's attention in the stadium are drawn away from what the person was speaking. She did that systematically. So when she came onto the stage and she wanted sort of to embrace me or something, so I say to her, you can't do wrong things like that. Just repetitive and must come to an end. In my gesturing, I knock off her head. So she knew she was wrong. So there was no need for reconciliation. She didn't protest.
She understood.
She knew that it was the wrong thing to do.
Mr. President, Mama Winnie was a very vocal person on issues of patriarchy, and I think this was her rallying cry, if
Sure.
you like, almost to the last moments. Do you feel that she has a point, that the ANC has a lot of work to be done, particularly I think coming out of the 54th conference of the ANC, where there's only one female leader in the top 6 of the party? Are we seeing, is there a regression here?
No, she's got it's a correct point. It's a correct point she's raised, and indeed it was good, it's very good that a person of her standing and prominence would want to keep a matter like that high on the agenda of the ANC. It's correct. No, I think we need to look at the manner in which we approach this question. What I've been saying is there is something that is called gender mainstreaming. And it's a very important concept in terms of responding to this matter about women's emancipation, women's empowerment, and so on. And probably we don't have time for me to explain this. Let me just give you one little example of a university in the United States. What you see happening in the universities, including here in this country, is that you'd find that in the lower junior lecturer positions, ordinary lecture positions at universities, lots of women end up being there without rising further. And part of the reason is because they are women. They give birth to children, and the university does not allow for that period when this senior lecturer is pregnant, must breastfeed, and so on. In a sense, it's deducted as time away from her academic work, which results in failure to promote. So, just to give a small example, in a US university, they decide that where you have teachers, lecturers that are breastfeeding, you must create situation at university that she breastfeeds the child at university, so that she doesn't have to get into a car and drive home and then come back, because the university takes that time away from work and it impacts negatively. So what they did is to create conditions at the university so that the children, a creche, a kindergarten at university, so that the mothers who are teaching could do that. I'm saying that kind of gender mainstreaming, to say whatever policies you put in place on any issue, to say what's the impact of these policies on women. We haven't done that. We tried when we were in government, insufficient, but I think we must go back to that.
The ANC, Mr. President, has strongly advocated for the upliftment of women, seeing women in positions of responsibility.
Sure.
Why has it regressed, seemingly, Mr. President?
Well, I'm not sure that you can say it has regressed.
The 54th
Sure.
conference.
Sure, in terms of the in terms of the 54th conference, I think that they will say, I haven't counted the numbers, but they will probably say, if you look at the National Executive Committee as a whole, it's 50-50. It may not be 50-50 in the top 6, but in the totality of the membership, and they would probably be correct. But it would have been important to go beyond that because of the particular place that top 6 occupies. Maybe to say even the top 6 must be the top 6. Unfortunately, is not. There's no a structure in the ANC constitution called the top 6. It doesn't exist. Even in terms of decision making, there's no decision taken by the top 6. So as maybe people then don't pay attention to, if the constitution says 50-50, the national executive must be 50-50, and probably is, without paying attention to this particular matter.
Mr. President, when you dismissed your former deputy back in 2005, a female candidate came in the name of Xoli Mngambi. Will we ever get a time in the ANC where we're likely to see a female leader emerge and possibly occupy the position of deputy president? Because at the moment, it doesn't look like it. How far are we from seeing a female president in this country?
It must be a conscious decision, Xoli. It's got to be a conscious decision. It's got really to be a decision to say we have to make sure that we get a female deputy president. It's not going to happen on its own. So in this instance that we are talking about, we decided as officials, I raised this thing with the officials of the ANC, as we did with all of the appointments, that we must take advantage of a situation that has been created to put a woman comrade in this position, and the officials all agreed. But I'm saying it's got to be a conscious intervention, otherwise it won't happen.
As we wrap our conversation, Mr. President, the Mandela family, Mama Winnie passes at a time when I think the country is still perhaps unsure about where things are in relation to the unity of the Mandela family. Is there an effort perhaps from the part of leaders like yourself, the party at party level, to try and unite the Mandela family? I don't need to tell you the issues that have afflicted that family since the passing of Madiba. How do you view the family at this moment in time, and given that the matriarch of the family now leaves at a time like this?
Well, Xoli, I mean, I have said this to members of the Mandela family in the past, even after Madiba passed away, that we would keep an eye on the family, and that if we saw that things were radically going bad, we would intervene. I've said that to them, and I've said even now that whatever they'd like us to do, we are on standby. So they know that in a sense we're available as a kind of resource. But I'm obviously, if there was something that really radically went badly wrong, we would intervene. But as I say, they all know that we are watching, as naturally we would, and would be available to assist to the extent that assistance would be called for.
Just finally, Mr. President, the women of South Africa who looked up to Mama Winnie, her struggles, her fortitude, determination to see to it that what she fought for is finally achieved. What do you think are the key lessons perhaps that they can draw from this powerful leader, woman leader?
You see, Xoli, as I was saying to you earlier, I think the earliest public representation of Winnie in a political setting would have been 60 years ago. So this was somebody who's been in struggle for that long. So you got a generation, fortunately, here in this country, which has been in struggle for 60 years plus. When you talk about Andrew Mlangeni, you are going beyond 60 years. And I think it's very necessary. There's a mistake we've made, a failure on our part, that we have not put together this experience of these generations, which is enormous, huge volume of experience about how to respond to various challenges. the moments of joy and happiness, moments of great depression, of suffering, and all of that. How do you handle all of that and contact with the people? In the case of women, other women of her generation, older generation, what the ANC decided to mark the centenary of the birth of Albertina Zulu is correct, and be part of that. I'm saying that is to take out that whole pool, use this passing away of Winnie to pull this experience so that indeed the Winnie doesn't die. And all of these leaders don't die in terms of the next generation. That would be important, particularly in our situation today, because it's very visible. You can see it, that the quality of leadership currently is not very encouraging.
Mr. President, it would be remiss of me, I know I said this was the final question, but it would be remiss of me not to ask you, perhaps, to tell us how we should remember the aspect of her history that is not so beautiful, stompy sepe. How do you think the country should grapple with that aspect of her history, because it's part of who she was?
Absolutely, yes. That's why I'm saying, you see, the if indeed we said, what should the younger generations learn from this older generation? As part, I'm saying, to impact especially on this matter of improving the quality of leadership among as wide a base as is possible. In that context, you've absolutely correctly, you've got to discuss the negative things too, because that's also part of the lesson of their upbringing. To say there were wrong things that happened of this kind. How do you, they may recur if you don't discuss them, so that what is it that you need to do in order to avoid a recurrence? It might be different in form and all that, but wrong in any case. So you can't avoid it in the context in which I'm talking, so that we don't just mark the passing, the very, very unfortunate passing of Winnie Mandela, just to be praise singers, but to say here is a very, very rich experience from an absolutely outstanding activist of our struggle. That rich experience must impact on our preparing the next generation, that includes discussing the negatives.
Mr. President, it's been a pleasure talking to you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you for your time. Kathy, that was the conversation with former President Thabo Mbeki. And of course, we're coming to you live from the foundation that he's set up here in Johannesburg. At this moment, we're going to hand it back to you.
Well, thanks for that, Xoli. The former president certainly sharing some interesting insights there in conversation with our senior political reporter, Xoli Mngambi.